Hey everybody, Ryan Reel, lead buyer's agent here with the Wannabe Group. All right, a lot of questions, a lot of people asking about interest rates. I put out a lot of information about how they're coming down. People are asking how and why, like explain this to us. Why should we listen to you? So let's go through this briefly. So consumer price index, CPI, and interest rates. Let's go through this. All right, so CPI is what basically is mirroring inflation. So the consumer price index, there is a headline number and there's a core number. So the headline number is everything, the cost of goods, cost of services. The core number strips out energy and it strips out food. The reason that the Fed likes to do that is they feel that they don't have a lot of control over food pricing. They don't have a lot of control over energy pricing, but there's more control over the other stuff. So core CPI is what generally is going to be in line with inflation. As core CPI goes up, inflation goes up. How does this tie into interest rates? It's basically the cost, the value of a dollar, right? So if a lender, gives a loan for $1 million, they know they're going to make X number of dollars, and they're going to be able to pay their staff. They're going to be able to pay their lease to keep the lights on. They're going to pay their own salary. They're going to pay for their systems, etc. If a dollar is now only worth 90 cents due to inflation, they can't pay their bills. So the only way that they can stay in business and continue servicing home buyers is to raise the interest rates to basically account for that inflation. So as inflation goes up, interest rates go up. That's what we've seen over the last year. As inflation comes down, interest rates come down. So let's take a look at this. How have I been in line with this since last September? So let's take a look. Monthly core CPI readings, right? So we're going all the way back to June of 2021, and we have March of 2023 on the far right-hand side. All right, so when we're looking at this, we knew inflation was going to go up last summer because we could look at the numbers from July, August, and September of 2021, right? So these are 12-month rolling averages, so 0.3, 0.2, 0.3. We knew that inflation was going up. We knew that the numbers that were going to come back were going to be higher. So these smaller numbers, July at 0.3, August at 0.2, September at 0.3, were going to be replaced with bigger numbers, which was 0.3 for July. So it was the same. But then it jumped up from 0.2 to 0.6 in August and from 0.3 to 0.6 in September. So we could see inflation was going to happen. We could read the writing on the wall. All right. And so with this, that's how we knew inflation was going up. We also knew that inflation was going to come back down at the end of the fall going into the early winter of 2022 because we knew the Fed had hiked up interest rates, right? We knew that that was going to have an impact. So we looked at the numbers from 2021, 0.7, 0.6, 0.7. We looked and we knew the numbers were going to come back smaller than that, and they ultimately did 0.3, 0.3, and 0.4. So if you remember, towards the end of 2022, rates did slide down a little bit. They jumped up April, May, June. They had jumped up in July, but they ultimately did not, or they ultimately did come back down. And that's where a lot of my buyers were able to take the information I was giving them and make really great decisions and purchases. So when we look at this year, right, January, February, and March, we basically had stagnant inflation, right? So we went 0.6 was replaced by 0.45 in January, right? Interest rates ticked down a little bit in January, right? That's when I bought a home in January, got a very good interest rate. There's a lot of people that would love to have the interest rate that I got in about a 2-week period. There's a 2-week window in January. February, 0.5, February of this year, 0.5, no movement. March, 0.3 from last year, 0.4, ticked back up. Right. And we can see this when we look at the market data. So we basically have had stagnant inflation for the first quarter of this year. So what are we looking at? Why am I projecting that inflation is going to come back down towards the end of July into August, September, and October? Let's take a look at it. We're looking at these numbers, right? We're looking at April, May, June, July, August, and September of last year. Are the numbers that are going to come in this year going to be smaller, the same, or bigger? We know that inflation is coming down. We saw that with the numbers that came out in May, they came out for April. We saw it come back down, all right? And we're going to dig a little bit further into this in a minute. But what we're looking at for May, June, right? Remember the May number we got earlier this week in June, it again ticked down. Headline and core CPI came down. All right, so 0.6 was replaced with a smaller number. June, July, and August. right? We know that the number that's going to come back in July for June is going to be less than 0.6. Inflation will tick down. This will be the third month in a row that inflation will have ticked down, and interest rates are going to follow that. July of last year, we saw inflation drop back down randomly, right? We remember that it was reported in August. If you look back at the housing data from August of last year, you had August was a hot month. And that was because the numbers that were being reported were from July. It was 0.3. You can see that data right now. But then we know that for August and September, August will be reported in September. September will be reported in October. 0.6 and 0.6, those are big numbers. Those are going to be replaced with smaller numbers. That's how we know inflation is going to come down, and interest rates will follow that. And then we look at October being reported in November, November and December, etc. We have lower numbers that are back within reason. So that's how we know that inflation is going to come back down as we go through the middle and the end of the summer into the early fall. Here's the other key component to this. With inflation coming down over the summer, shelter replacement costs over the past year. So shelter costs make up 43% of the core CPI. This is rents and owner equivalent rents. All right. What we know is, looking at this, we have had a cresting of numbers December, January, and February. Right. This was the peak of the rental increase of inflation of rental rates, right? Everybody's been feeling that, especially here in San Diego. March and April, this was a definitive tick down, right? We know that as this continues to drop, it's accounting for 43% of the core CPI. This is a huge weighted factor. This is another indicator of the tailwinds that are behind us on decreasing the interest rate. Let's take a look at some another way of looking at this, right? So shelter costs, these are lagging indicators. These are lagging metrics, meaning that it's a 12-month rolling average and the better numbers are coming. So if we look, this was over the summer of last year. This was into the beginning, like here's January of this year, right? We've seen this has been coming down. We can see that these numbers were 15 to 18% at the peak. In February, it was at 2.7, March 2.6, April just came back at 1.7. This is definitively on the downside of a roller coaster, right? The problem is we have the Fed looking at one of these key metrics while they're driving by looking in the rearview mirror. If you think about this as a big giant roller coaster, this is where the front car is. The back car is still somewhere over here. This is where the Fed is looking. It's still going up. It's still going up. No, it's well down. That lead car is already down. Everyone's already done screaming on the lead car. All right. So this is a huge tailwind that is behind us. As this continues to drop, as bigger numbers get replaced with smaller numbers with shelter costs, we're going to see an even more potentially rapid decrease of CPI. So I hope this makes sense to you guys, gives you a little bit of a breakdown on why we're projecting interest rates will come back down as we get to the end of July into August, September, and October.